The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane Rollins and Kevin Laramee. Live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Good day, good night, and welcome to Soccer Today for Sunday, MLS Cup Day, November 10th, 2019. I'm Kevin Laramee, joined by Duane Rollins. As always, good morning, Duane.
Morning. There's games on today? I didn't know.
Yeah, there's a couple of games. Well, actually, a couple of games already finished. New Zealand is our topic of the day. No, of course, MLS Cup Final, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, between Toronto FC and Seattle Sounders. Live from CenturyLink is the game we have been waiting for a week now.
Yeah, and having been to a couple MLS Cup Finals, 3 MLS Cup Finals, precisely that noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern kickoff time, add about 20 minutes to it, but that's fine.
If not more. But yes, 3:20 should be the projected kickoff. We'll get to Toronto FC and Seattle in a second. We'll get to Jozy Altidore and the latest on his injury situation. But this morning, Canadian women's national team, Christine St. Clair, scored, and she's one away from tying Abby Wambach's all-time goal-scoring record.
Yeah, against New Zealand, they won 3-0, and it's unfortunately for Canada, they've had a bad run of form. They've lost back-to-back games 4-0 against Brazil and Japan leading into today. Did get the win today, so that's good to stop that momentum. But, you know, in some ways, I'm happy that Christine Sinclair obviously scored the goal to get one away. I'm also happy that she didn't score two, because had she scored two today, she would have had to share the day with whatever happens in MLS Cup, and that would have been unfair for someone like that, for this to happen without anyone watching. And then not only that, you get pushed down to page whatever because you have, you know, a championship men's game going on at the same time. So, but this is a brilliant player who will obviously, we used to have debates at the end of, I guess it was when Abby retired, is like, oh, do you think, do the math, and will she get through? Well, she's clearly going to get there now. I mean, when I talked to the head coach the last time, he suggested that she might actually play beyond the next Olympics, which we all sort of didn't expect. So yeah, she's going to get the record, and a brilliant player that's hopefully it happens when everyone can watch it and it can be celebrated properly, Kevin.
That's true, and we'll keep an eye on Christine St. Clair's goal-scoring tally, but you thought, and I thought it was worth a mention this morning. Yesterday, Duane, I had the pleasure to go to downtown Montreal, not far from where I live, for the Canadian Premier League panel, talking about year one. It was, of course, David Klanikan, Commissioner of the Canadian Premier League, Michael Findlay, Director of Soccer Operations. You also had Stephen Hart, Coach of the Halifax Wanderers, and Tommy Wilden Jr., Coach of Cavalry FC, plus a coach of the PLSQ team of Monteuil, David Seruswolo. It was a fun conversation. Well, the panel wasn't a conversation, it was a panel, obviously, and you can find the audio free for everyone on our Patreon page, patreon.com/sportspodcast. But Duane, also a 20-minute sit down with Commissioner David Klanikan, where we learned a few things. 3 ownership groups for the province of Quebec, but 2020, not only for Quebec, but for expansion in general in the Canadian Premier League, is looking less and less likely by the day. 2021 will be a year where new teams will be joining the Canadian Premier League.
Yeah, unfortunately, we reported that a month or so ago. You know, at that time, what I had been told was that they weren't actively working towards new teams in the soccer operations department, and for them to add a team at this stage would be very rushed. They did it. This was when they were adding teams last year, but of course you're trying to start a league last year, so everything's rushed, right? They would rather come in with good form rather than just shove them in there quick. But look, we're well overdue on the Quebec side of things. I think we all know that, both from a symbolism standpoint, from doing the right thing standpoint, but also just from a player development standpoint. And I look, Kevin, at the event that this roundtable was surrounded with, which is, of course, the U Sport Men's Championship that's going on in Montreal this weekend. Well, the final takes place this afternoon, I believe.
Yes.
And
at 3 p.m.
It's
at 2:30.
Yeah, so some conflicts there. I guess Impact fans have something to watch now, because it's the University of Montreal against Trois-Rivières. So it's an all-Quebec matchup.
An all-Quebec final in the U Sports Men's Soccer Championship game later today. Interesting, in the panel, they talk about the late bloomers and how this partnership with U Sport really gives a window for recruitment, but not just recruiting, for scouting for the Canadian Premier League, for the draft, but also for late bloomers, players that are outside of your radar. And there's a couple of discovery avenues now for the Canadian Premier League. You have the drafts, you have of course, the God Game trials last year. There's a bank of player now and database. So all those things together, there'll be a bit more of new players in flux coming next year, and some of them might be coming from the Canadian Championship today in the world of U Sports.
Yeah, I would argue that the least tapped area of the country right now would be in the province of Quebec. And I don't know whether some of those players might have held back a year with the hope that there would be a CAMPL team coming in next year, or whether or not they just were under-scouted. It could be a combination of both.
Yeah.
And I would suggest that with these finals taking place in Montreal right now, looking at how well Blainville did in the Canadian Championship, that you would be silly if you were a CAMPL, one of the 7 coaches, to not be looking at the province of Quebec to add some of those players that are making that part of the country shine on the amateur front right now. And look, it was one great UDM and Cape Breton met in the semifinal. It was an epic game that Montreal got past, and I think in another day maybe Cape Breton could make an argument that they were definitely worthy of being in a final. But sometimes it's just the way the cookie crumbles, right? And Trevor Vieira also has a lot of players that have some high level of experience, so it should be a good game this afternoon. And I don't know whether it'll be available on replay anywhere, but probably if you go to usport.ca, if you want to watch the MLS Cup Final and then immediately flip to that might be a nice way to spend your afternoon. If you just hate TFC and don't want to even see them in the final, also something you can do.
Let's talk a little bit about MLS from the Canadian Premier League side. 2 days ago now, famously, Don Garber, Commissioner of Major League Soccer, answered Nicolas Martineau of TVA Sport when he was asked about the relationship between Major League Soccer and the Canadian Premier League. What is this relationship? Don Garber mentioned, well, we don't really have one. I have more on this. I asked the Commissioner, David Clanacan, Commissioner, you don't have a relationship with MLS. Can you explain to us a little bit more? He's like, well, we do have a relationship with MLS, especially with the 3 clubs in our country. We met with them. We had dialogues with them. It was coming from the MLS team. They wanted to know our positions on stuff. So there is an open channel of dialogue between MLS, at least the teams in Canada, and Commissioner David Clanacan and the Canadian Premier League. Also, he mentioned, I've been a bit busy since last November, starting a league in 7 clubs, so didn't have a chance to talk to Don Garber. And Commissioner Clanacan is a busy man in Europe, too, because a lot of other teams in the world of football want to know, how do you start a league with 7 teams? It's something that hasn't been done in 100 years or so. So very, very in high demand for David Clanacan. So he was busy. So that's a bit more about why, I would guess, the 2 commissioners didn't sit down together.
Well, and honestly, what purpose would they have? And look, I mean, I guess you could take Don Garber's flippancy on that in a negative way. And they are competitors in some level. I mean, York 9 is certainly very much in the same region of TFC. They can argue otherwise, but you could throw a stone into Toronto from where they are, right? So it's not necessarily not going to be seen as a bit of a competitor, particularly when you're talking about sponsors. But at the same time, Major League Soccer is at just a completely different stage of its development and level and everything else, that it's not really a competitive situation. And it makes sense that the CAMPL would have had conversations with, TFC and Impact and the Whitecaps, but why would they need to have to talk to, Don Garber? They have FC Cincinnati had a lone player too. So individual teams are where these relationships would make most sense right now. I just don't see much purpose for either party to, be chatting on the phone every day, because Don Garber is worried about, a CBA, not, what this little tiny league above him in his mind is doing, right? So yeah. I wouldn't read too much into that. I also wouldn't read too much into the fact that, it was reported the other day that the MLS teams, the 3 Canadian MLS teams, were advocating on the Ottawa Fury's talk or point of view to keep that team sanctioned within USL. And, that is really about those MLS teams arguing for being cross-sectioned or cross-league sanctioned, because they don't want to be moved out by force anytime soon. And, that is going to be a question that we're going to talk about in a decade, I think, for real. But right now it's not a question. So relax and enjoy the MLS Cup Final involving a Canadian team.
Yes, tonight, this afternoon, TFC Seattle Sounders, the rubber match, the trilogy fight, the third fight. That's where the money is made. That's where you decide who wins the rivalry. You know that with this MLS Cup, Toronto FC and the Seattle Sounders tied the LA Galaxy and DC United for the most, I would say, the most amount of MLS Cup presents.
Pairings.
Pairings. That's the word I was looking for. So yeah, it's three times the charm. That's the most amount of games between the same teams in MLS Cup's history.
Yeah, we've seen a couple times in history where we've had two. Certainly the Revolution and the Galaxy played a couple times. We saw
the Galaxy
Houston,
Dynamo. Well, you just mentioned Houston.
Yeah, Houston, New England also. So it's happened a few times, but to get to 3 and 4 is really unique. And it's testament, I think, it's not just unique that it's a matchup. Obviously, that takes it over the top, but just the fact that these two teams individually have been in 3 or 4 championships in a league which does have all of these parity mechanisms in them does suggest that there's a divide. Like, you can't argue it anymore, that there is a divide between the top tier and the lower tier within Major League Soccer, and that can frustrate teams. The other two teams in Canada have not really demonstrated that they're in that tier yet. So I mean, with all due respect to Montreal's 2016 run.
We'll start by making the playoffs on a regular basis for both Canadian teams that are not in the MLS Cup today, before they can actually say that they have a stake at what you're talking about.
Yeah, it has to do with money, and a lot of, like, the top 4 teams in the Major League Soccer, like the semifinalists, were all the top 4 spending teams in Major League Soccer. And for years, we have heard people argue that there's no correlation between spending and success in MLS. That's bull now. It really is.
Yeah, it is bullshit now.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess we can say it full out.
Why not? Why not? Yeah. We could.
CRTC is not listening to us.
We are our own CRTC, Duane. So once in a while, a well-placed little, it works.
Yeah, the CRTC is the FCC for your American listeners out there in Canada. It really has to do with money, but there are still mechanisms. You can still see success if you don't have all of that spending in Major League Soccer, and that is something that the proponents of parity love. I mean, we did see, I'm trying to, a good example of this. Even Portland, in a way, isn't the highest spending of high spending teams, and they have success in a way. So it's possible out there. But here we are, 3 and 4 with these two teams, which is, great, because you aren't necessarily successful just with spending. I think that's the difference between Major League Soccer and other leagues in the world. Like, it doesn't matter how many bad defenders Pep signs, City's still going to be pretty good, right? Because they can just spend so much more than everyone else. Speaking of which, yes, we're aware that Liverpool plays City at 11 o'clock. Trust me, I'm well aware. So
that's why we had the show early today.
Yes. So we haven't talked about it this week because that is not our bread and butter. We'll probably talk a little bit about what happened in it in the days ahead, or the days ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're just joining us, extended coverage this weekend. You have a few special bonus audio according to the Canadian Premier League on our Patreon page, patreon.com/sportspodcast network. Duane and I will be live tomorrow and on Monday as well, Monday and Tuesday. So tomorrow and Tuesday for Soccer Today. Also, on Wednesday starts our little vacation, a week vacation for Duane and I. We worked really hard, and before we get everything else started next week, we're going to take a week off, but we're there on Monday and Tuesday to break down today and the next couple days in the world of soccer. Let's talk Jozy Altidore before we go into our final predictions heading into MLS Cup today. Here is on MLSsoccer.com. This is from yesterday. After taking a full part in training on Friday, Jozy Altidore continues to keep alive hope that he'll be able to play part in MLS Cup on Sunday against the Seattle Sounders. He took part in a full session on Friday, a lighter session on Saturday, and now it's up to how his injured quad, who's been rehabbing since October 6th, reacts to playing soccer for the first time in a month. Jozy or no Jozy, Duane?
Jozy on the bench, and maybe Jozy late. I could see. Here's the thing, and here's what you have to be careful with. I've heard it was on Extra Time this week. They actually advocated that if Jozy can give you 20 minutes, you should start him for 20 minutes and then use one of your subs. And that's backwards from how most people would do this. but
he gets a goal early, and the whole tactical matchup change.
Exactly. Now, the other danger that they quite rightly pointed out is if you throw Jozy on, say, in the 60th minute or the 70th minute, and maybe he ties the game up or the game goes into extra time, then at that point, can he last the full 30? So that you're looking at almost a full game, right? You're 70 minutes rather than 30. And then is he playing on one leg? You're playing a man down effectively late in that game. Like, you run that risk.
At that point, you also have a special sub, right? In the extra time, so you have the bonus sub.
Yeah, you might. Yeah, I'd have to. That I'm not sure. I think they do actually have the force sub now in the 30 minutes extra. The other option you could do is you could hold them off,
and then
you could use them in the extra time if you got to that point. I love how we're talking about extra time right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a weapon. It's a decoy on the bench, and you do have to change your strategy a little bit if you're Seattle, because he offers a completely different look. I think you have to just be aware that you may have to tactically shift yourself if the Sounders. Now, all this is dependent, of course, on the game still being in play late if he's on the bench, right? And obviously, I think both teams, the first 20 or 30 minutes of the game is going to be absolutely key. Seattle's going to want to go out and roll. And, just like I think back to 2017, same matchup, obviously, Toronto was flying in those first 30 minutes and could have been up 2 or 3 goals if not for Stephen Fry again. And it was only because Fry was so good in that first half that the game became more tactically tense in the second half. Had Toronto gotten, they had a chance in the 3rd minute, for God's sakes, when Osorio flashed one past the post. Had that been another inch, it's a different game altogether. And maybe TFC's, we're having Olays in the second half. And I think that's what Seattle's trying to establish today, to have Olays in the second half. Everyone wants that in the final because that's more fun.
Especially if there's 70,000 people.
Yeah, exactly. And not so much fun for the 3,000 in the top corner. But it's nonetheless, it would be what they would be looking to do. I don't think Toronto necessarily has the ability to have the Olays themselves in the second half. So their objective is a little bit different, is to keep things tight as long as possible, because I do believe, just like Seattle believed in 2016, that it's almost role reversal, right? That Toronto wants us to stay tight as long as possible, and they believe that they have enough difference makers on that team that if they get a free, a set piece, they get, Jozy on late, they get some kind of break that they can nick one, just like Seattle nicked 2016. Now, I don't know, obviously we could make jokes aside, but Toronto and penalties have not mixed well, to say the least.
Yeah, but you got to exercise your demons, and one of the best way to do this is to do it for a trophy. I'm telling you, I had the feeling all week.
No one's
going
to be talking about Toronto and penalties if they win the penalty shootout today.
No, but it might come down to this. We'll finish the show soon. On that note, is I do feel, and I'm not alone, I was looking at Christian Jack on TSN talking about maybe it's going to go now to the goalkeepers. I've been saying this for the last week. I said this on Tuesday. I look at Stephen Fry. I look at Quentin Westberg. First of all, they're separated at birth. Why did no one make a side-by-side pictures of these two? Like, is this the same guy separated twice? It's like, I don't know. It's amazing. But also, it might come down to this. It might come down to the defenders and the goalkeepers if there's a big error or penalties tonight. But also there's a possibility that Toronto FC comes out in MLS Cup in a tactical setup that we're not expecting. Greg Vanney did pull a rabbit out of his hat in 2017 when he came into MLS Cup and he won that game. How do you think Greg Vanney is approaching the game today?
Yeah, absolutely. He's become known for that. For those that don't remember, he went to a 4-4-2 diamond in the final after being synonymous with the wing-back system, the 5 at the back or 3 at the back, depending on how you wanted to spin it. And that was a complete change from everything they had done and been so successful with all year. He obviously saw something in the way Seattle was set up, knew Seattle was going to set up to play against his wing-back system, and completely caught them off guard. And no one was talking about it too. They hit it well in training, right? That's the other thing. Even when you don't open up training for folks, there's still often things will squeak out a little bit if they're going to have a major formation change. But he did that. Look, they're going to play on the road, so that I wouldn't be shocked if they start 3 defenders in the 3 center backs, is what I'm saying. If they start both They get Omar, Samal, and Mavinga all in the middle with two kind of fullbacks that will shift up into a wing situation when needed. It wouldn't shock me if they went legit five at the back in this game to
Who's your
try and keep
fullbacks?
things tight.
Richie Larea on one side?
Well, Morrow will play with one. It depends on Oro or Larea. Oro is a very good player that doesn't get talked about a lot. Larea is a little defensively suspicious, so I think that you probably go with more veterans back there. So you're looking at Oro and Morrow.
And
And then you
Larea
have
maybe a sub later on, like we have
yeah,
seen him
Larea
perform
if you
well.
need a goal, yeah,
Yeah, that makes sense.
because he. So that's kind of how what I wouldn't shock me to see him play five at the back, with a little more defensive style. Seattle's strength really is its ability to get some wing play and to get some speed moving forward. And Jordan Morris has been playing pretty well. So you want to keep him in tight. You want to shut him down in the game, and if you're playing a little tighter at the back, then sure. And you sort of play a system. And I don't think Jozy's starting. Like I think that he's probably 10 minutes at most, to be honest with you. So really, what you're trying to do is you're trying to just survive and create from your midfield position. TFC's midfield hasn't got the respect it deserves in this playoffs. Not just Bradley, who has played very well. He's like after he lost to Canada in BMO Field, it's like something lifted off him, and he's just playing looser or something. So God help us on Friday, which I haven't even thought about Friday yet. So forget that for a second. That's Canada USA if you're missing it. But it's also Delgado and Osorio Osorio has arguably been, and I've heard American commentators say that he's maybe been the best player in the playoffs for period. So those three players, and I think that they'll probably play, are key there as well. You'd look at Pazuello, who I think has also had a very effective playoffs, playing a different role than he's played most of the season, kind of running around loosely at the top. If he can create magic out of nothing as well, and that's kind of what TFC is looking to do. I think it's a role reversal from 2016 and 17, and we saw two tight games basically in those 2 years, and I don't anticipate today is going to be any different than that. I don't think there's going to be Olays in the second half.
And now let's touch on Seattle before we say goodbye and make our prediction for MLS Cup Final. How does Seattle beat Toronto tonight? Or is it more how does Seattle win? Because maybe they can win without beating Toronto. Maybe Toronto's not gonna beat themselves. But how does Seattle lift the Philip F. Anschutz Trophy late this afternoon?
By not panicking. I think they do have slightly more horses than TFC right now. TFC's horses, they're good players, are either have playing their 17th straight month of soccer in Pozuelo, are playing on one leg if they're playing at all in Jozy. Bradley has played a lot of football as well, and is a year on. Like a lot of TFC's key players have questions. Seattle's players don't quite have the same questions, and they're at home, and that does make a major difference. So I think that Seattle's key is that they stick to their game plan and they don't panic if it doesn't go perfectly well off the start. Like if we are looking 30 minutes into this game and they are still 0-0, or hell, maybe TFC's found one at that point, I still think Seattle just needs to stick with what they're doing. Because I do think that Toronto has the veteran presence that if Seattle gets out of shape or starts to panic or starts to push forward too much, that Toronto could burn them, because they just, I don't think, are going to have mental problems in this game. Toronto's a mentally strong team. That is their biggest strength. So Seattle needs to match that. And if they do, the talent level should be enough to put them over the top. Because if I take my fan hat off, or toque, I prefer a toque, my fan toque off, and put my logical toque on, it's Seattle's to lose. Not bad, and it's no shame from a TFC perspective, but it's still Seattle's to lose. So if Seattle plays its games, if it sticks to its guns, if it just doesn't panic at any point, then I think that they will have enough to just get it done.
Yep, and we'll know later on. Let's finish this with our predictions. Duane, who wins the 2019 MLS Cup, according to Duane Rollins?
Okay, well, look, I just said all that, so I believe Seattle could win it. But look, this is why I'm going to justify picking Toronto. I'm in Toronto. I got to pick Toronto. Come on. But it's how it happens to my is, again, it comes down to that mental strength all through these playoffs, all through the season, really, since they started to not lose. I don't want to say win, I'll say not lose at the start of August. Everyone's doubted them step after step after step after step. And this veteran team that has gone through this not just 3 times, now this being the 3rd, but 4 really, because that CCL run was almost a whole extra season unto itself, mentally and emotionally. So this is not their first rodeo, right? And they know how to figure it out. They know how to win when they're not playing well. They know how to perform when they are playing well. So to me, that's how Toronto wins this, is that they just mentally stick to it. They absorb some rough spots in this game. I don't think it's going to be 90 smooth minutes. This will not be the 2017 final, which was just a complete one-way performance. The only thing that wasn't there were the goals, really. The second one was late. So I'm going to say 1-0 Toronto. I'm going to say that they gut out a clean sheet, that they get a late goal. I'm not going to go so absurd and say that it's Jozy in the 89th minute or something, which would be hilarious, but I don't think it'll be that. I'm going to go with an underappreciated TFC player. So let's just say
Osorio.
Nah, that's almost too. I'm going to go Delgado in the 71st minute. Okay, 1-0. Marky Delgado wins the MLS Cup.
Mark his words. Marky Delgado, winner. All right, my prediction tonight is, unfortunately for Toronto FC fans, I look at Raul Ruidíaz with Lodero and Jordan Morris, and I had that conversation last night with a couple of colleagues at the panel looking into today's game, and I cannot see another scenario than Ruidíaz and Lodero at least producing 1 goal. Now the question is, can Toronto score, and can they contain Lodero, Ruidíaz, and Jordan Morris? And let's not forget Brad Smith, who's going to be, in my opinion, one of the keys for Seattle to win today in the back line, and how he supports the offense on the sideline. So I think Toronto FC is going to score 1, but Seattle is going to score 2. And it'll be 2-1 Seattle in 2019.
All right, well, there you go. So, look, if Delgado scores in the 71st minute, I'm retiring. But no, I won't retire, but I might as well. I'm retiring from predictions at that point.
You'll have a few days off for sure. On that note, Duane and I will get ready for Liverpool, Man City, and also MLS Cup later today. A friend of the network, personal friend, Tristan D'Amour, will be with me in studio watching MLS Cup. And after MLS Cup, we'll go live with an MLS Cup post-game show. Why not? We'll have fun later today right here on the Sports Podcast Network, on our Soccer Today feed, on Twitter at Soccer Today SPN. You can follow Duane at 24th Minute, myself at Kevin Laramee, and all the podcasts that we do, you can find them on our website, sportspodcastingnetwork.com. Until next time, as always, have a great MLS Cup.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.